Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and thanks for coming back for the second part of our episode called Batman versus Spider-Man, where we look at the differences between these two superhero pop cultural icons. Before we go into the second half, I just want to remind you, if you're new to the channel, please like, please subscribe, please comment, please share. Randall, what is a good way for people to subscribe, like, or comment?
Just go to our website, chrisandrandall.com, and there's links to the podcasts and YouTube and Facebook, and our Facebook page is a good way to comment.
Excellent. All right. Well, as we were covering before, we're talking about the two differences between Spider-Man and Batman, not as like a comic book fight, but just as cultural icons and how they line up. We looked at their creators' origins. We looked at some similarities and some differences. Now we're really going to go down into the fine nuggets. So this is what we're going to cover next. So let's now deal with just Batman and Spider-Man and other mediums and how they have fared outside of comic books. And just to be clear, we're not going to talk about any of the Batman serials from the 1940s, and we're not going to talk about the horrible Broadway stage bomb that came out a couple of years ago called Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. So we're jumping into the 1960s when, strangely enough, they both simultaneously had there was a TV show for Batman in the mid-60s and an animation show for Spider-Man in the mid-60s, and both of them were just incredibly zany and mod. Have you seen either of them or both of them?
I watched them both when I was a kid. I enjoyed them as a kid, yes.
And did you know who wrote the theme for Batman?
No, who?
Pete Townsend. He's actually the Who.
Amazing.
Could not be more mod, right? Whereas the Spider-Man theme was composed by Paul Francis Webster, who was an Academy Award-winning composer, and Bob Harris. So
they're both great themes.
Enough, the two shows, cheap as can be, right? Bad acting. Everything about it was, the only great thing aesthetically was that it was zany on both counts. Had two incredible theme songs that people know to this day.
Very memorable.
And both of those things bled a little bit over to the characters, but also the Superman TV series was popular in the 50s, but in the 1960s, really the two most successful IPs, as people like to call them these days, intellectual properties adaptations, were the Batman TV show, which did have a brief movie based on the TV show with Adam West, and the Batman and the Spider-Man cartoon. The first season was very good, and the other two were done by Ralph Bakshi. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I've never gone back and watched them. What did you think about the Bakshi Spider-Man show?
Well, apparently they just used he just fought monsters in the other two seasons, whereas the first one were at least adaptations of comic books. I'll give the advantage, honestly, I prefer the Spider-Man animation. I didn't like the Batman TV show. I thought it was way too sadistic, but I know a lot of people loved it.
Sadistic? You mean the 60s show?
Yeah, because of the tortures. I always found them to be hard to stomach.
Really?
Yeah, I just did. I really.
But they were done for comic effect, almost.
They were, and they were popular with the boomers. Both of them, young boomers. In fact, Spider-Man has always been a boomer hero, but I think that Batman, the mod version from the TV show, probably made him more popular to boomers than the comic book. Changed the shift of the comic for a little while, and then by the 1970s, as a comic book, Batman and Spider-Man were really well written. They had writers, no longer Stan Lee or Bob Kane, but they had writers who were boomers, young writers who were treating both Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams on Batman, Roy Thomas, John Romita Jr. on Spider-Man. But you had people who were really both writing comic books at a level that had never been written before, dealing with drugs, dealing with racism, real issues. As we said, Ra's al Ghul gets introduced in the 70s. The Punisher gets introduced in the 70s. Some of the best writing is really going on in the 70s right through the 80s, and these are much more, almost all the really good elements for both superheroes. The insecurity of Peter Parker, how does he function when he gets out of college? What does he do for a living? What is his relations like? What does Batman do when Robin goes to college? They're really good, but I would argue at the same time that the comics are really good, the animation and the TV shows are terrible. I mean, right?
Well,
Super Friends Batman is just god awful.
Well, I just want to say for the young kids listening, if there are any, comic book movies pre-Iron Man, they just took the character and then they just did whatever they wanted. They didn't even. They barely.
I'm going to disagree with you 100%. You might want to hold back on that thought. In fact, I don't think you really meant it, because I want to just say, no, seriously, hold back that thought. I don't think you meant it. I think what really brings comic books back into something credible and good is the Batman the Motion Picture in 1989, the Tim Burton film. When that came out, everywhere you went, even kids who are African American would literally like put in their fade the Batman logo. It had a lot of hype. I waited 2 hours online just to see the film. It had a Prince theme song. It starred Michael Keaton. It was done by Tim Burton, who had done all those movies like Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands. Michael Keaton, who was a great actor, was the star in it. It was just top level. Jack Nicholson played the Joker, one of who would start this whole thing of only having great actors playing the Joker. Do you remember seeing that movie?
Yes, it was a big thing. It was a big event. Would you say that it was loosely based around Killing Joke? I mean, I think we've discussed this before.
I think so. Did you see it in the movie theaters?
Yes. Yes, it was very well received. I mean, everybody went and saw it. It was a big movie.
Yeah, it was. The thing that makes it so important to the storyline of what we're talking about is a lot of money was put into it, and the production design, the directing, the acting. There was a lot of things going on there, and it showed that if you actually treated the property, then it would do well.
Well, because
it was the first time that. Okay, that's not entirely true. I need to amend that. Superman the Motion Picture, which came out in the 70s, that was probably the first. But
yeah, the Superman movies were the first real serious adaptation of a comic book movie. But it's just my opinion that until Iron Man, they didn't really delve into the source. They didn't use the source material as. They didn't take the source material as seriously until Iron Man, I think.
But it's a serious film. Batman is serious.
Yes, they're both serious movies. Superman and Batman. Yes.
There's nothing mod about it. It's serious. Batman
they're making them. They're making them for a general audience instead of for just like little kids, right? I mean,
and they really work. You know what I'm saying? And the animated series from the WB starts right around then to support it.
The Batman
animated series is amazing, isn't it?
Batman the animated series, yes, yeah. It's a classic. People love it.
And
also, I want to give a mention.
Even better than the movies.
I also want to give a mention to the X-Men series, which
not now. No, this show is not about that. I mean, yeah, go ahead, man. But let's get back to it.
Well, it's just. I mean, if we're going along this line, I mean, the X-Men series was very important because it was a very faithful comic book adaptation made into an animated show, and I mean, it comes at a time when like kids are supposed to still be only ones watching comic book adaptations, and it's very adult. I mean,
yeah, but
so
that
was really influential.
Okay, well, it is and it isn't, because the Spider-Man animation at the time is terrible. It languishes while the Batman movies are doing well.
The X-Men series comes out, yeah, Batman, the Tim Burton movie, Superman movie, all that stuff.
Just for the sake of our listeners, let's get back to what we're talking about. So like Batman movies are all directed by big budget filmmakers, Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher, Christopher Nolan, Zack Snyder. They all star A-list actors like Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, Kristen Bale, Ben Affleck. And the Spider-Man movies hit about a decade later in 2002 with the Sam Raimi. And if you look at that, they're not bad, but, you know, Sam Raimi, Mark Webb, John Watts, these are indie filmmakers. Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland. They're notable actors, but they're not A-listers. And we'll get into the animation of Spider-Man at the very end. But why do you think that Batman movies worked better for the most part, and Spider-Man, it took longer for it to catch on? In fact, you and I have had this discussion, right, about, well, first off, what's your favorite Batman movie?
I really like Batman Begins, I guess. Now that I think about it,
That's the first of the Christopher
first
Nolans?
Nolan movie. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
I would say my favorite one is, it's tough. That's one of my favorites, and I also like the second Tim Burton Batman. But they're really good. Who's your favorite Batman?
Who's my favorite Batman? Oof. That's a tough one. I mean, Michael Keaton's great. Michael Keaton could be the best Batman, maybe.
He's really good. I'm a big fan of Kristen Bale. Though I do really like Michael Keaton. You know, I actually think one of the best Batman films, I guess one of the best Batman films is The Joker.
The joke? What?
The Joker. It's from the Batman universe.
I'm not sure which movie that is.
The Joker?
Oh, the new Joker. Yeah, the Joker movie. Yeah. That's a great movie. Yeah.
It really is. It's probably the best of the superhero films ever made.
Yeah, the director, writer, I forget his name now, but he did such a great job with that.
Darn, I can't remember. I was going to say Brett Ratner, but it's not Brett Ratner. But yeah, it's great. And it's interesting, too, because if you think about it,
yeah, I'm gonna give a little audience plug for Michael Moore's podcast, where Michael Moore interviews the writer director of the Joker movie. It's a great interview. It's like an hour long. If you're interested, you should listen to it.
And I think that there's some reasons why I think that I like the new Spider-Man movie. I have to say, I think my favorite Spider-Man movie is the first Spider-Man movie by Sam Raimi.
It's very good. Sam Raimi is a great director. You know, I know a little bit about the genesis of that movie. I think wasn't it James Cameron who had the idea for that movie? He wanted
yes, he's the one who actually came up with the idea that Spider-Man's webs would just come out of his
well, Cameron
wrist.
Cameron, you know, is always about making using new technology in movies, and I think Cameron was the first one with this idea that he was going to have a computer animated Spider-Man when he's swinging around and has the mask on, and then he would have live action Spider-Man when he's like on the ground being Peter Parker. And so that was his original conception. And then he tried for years to get this movie made, and I don't know why he didn't direct it, but then Sam Raimi directs it. And Sam Raimi, you know, is like this great kinetic old school horror movie director, and it's just a fun, visually amazing movie, the first Spider-Man movie.
Now, you and I did not like the second one. Everyone loves it. It's considered a great movie. You know, just like the second Batman in the Nolan trilogy is considered great. But neither of us are really big fans.
Is the second one, I barely remember now. Is the second one they threw everything in there, right? Venom's in there.
Yeah.
You know, I read a little bit about the making of that one too. Is they originally, like the creators, Raimi and all these other people, they wanted to make the Venom movie. They wanted to make the Spider-Man Venom movie, and they just, you know, the studio wasn't having it. So what they did was they made they threw a bunch of other stuff in there, including Venom, to please the studio, and it's just everything gets short shrift in that movie.
Did you see the Venom movie?
Yeah, so eventually a Venom movie gets made with what's his name, the actor
Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy, and I thought it was fun. I thought it was a great movie. It's just a lot of fun. What do you think?
Yeah, it's fun. It's not the Joker, but it's fun. And I have to admit, I liked that movie, even though it got poor reviews, more than many of the Spider-Man films. I will say I like the new Spider-Man movies that John Watt is directing that stars Tom Holland. I think they're really good. I'm looking forward to the third one. And I'm actually even curious about this new Batman movie directed by Matt Reeves with Robert Pattinson that kind of looks more like an indie version. I just think, I hate to say this, but I just think Batman lends himself more to the cinema and more to animation because of the expressionistic nature of the character versus I think with Peter Parker, it's hard. I love those movies, but they're just visually not as stunning.
You're saying the Spider-Man movies aren't as visually stunning?
Yeah.
Well, the Spider-Man movies, they've already set up this, and I've already talked about it, they've already set up this conceit that most of the Spider-Man action is computer generated. So it's on a different scale. It has a different aesthetic. I mean, most of the Batman movies, it's actual live action, right? I mean,
which is weird too, because the Batman movies have these elaborate sound stages. I've actually been on a sound stage for Spider-Man, but it's weird because Gotham is not a real city, and you can like take parts of different cities and make Gotham, which is what they do. Whereas all the on location stuff they do for New York, which is very little, unfortunately, very little, is all that you get to get the feel of the locale. The sound stages are otherwise very flat and boring in a Spider-Man movie. Wouldn't you say? Visually, it never gets better than the first Spider-Man film.
Well, Raimi, if you watch the first Spider-Man movie, you see a lot of techniques that Raimi mastered making low-budget horror. And they work really well in that Spider-Man movie. And the latter Spider-Man movies, there is a lot of let's just make it in the computer,
Which is interesting because I honestly think that Spider-Man Into the Multiverse is the best animated superhero film ever made.
It's very good.
And it's
very
probably
good.
One of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. It's definitely one of the best Spider-Man movies ever made.
Well, it's a lot of fun. The thing about the Spider-Man character is they can get away in Spider-Man with being irreverent, right? How can you make an irreverent Batman story? It's very difficult because Batman is so serious.
Well, it's got all the qualities missing, right? Visually stunning. It definitely feels like it takes place in the real world. The Peter Parker they present is one who's actually grown up. Miles Morales is a much more relatable non-boomer teen. Liev Schreiber does a great job as Kingpin, one of my favorite villains.
Yeah,
it's just perfect. It's just a perfect film.
Yeah, Into the Multiverse is from top to bottom, everything is perfect. And it's just fun. I mean, they don't take a lot of Spider-Man seriously. I mean, Spider-Man's barely actually in it, right? I mean, Miles.
Well, no, it just depends what you mean. Miles Morales is the Spider-Man, and Peter Parker is the mentor. We finally get to see what kind of mentor Peter Parker would be, voiced by Chris Pine, who does a great job, and also Jake Johnson. I'm sorry, Chris Pine. Jake Johnson is the one who dies, and Chris Pine, I think, is the one who lives.
You know what's interesting? Yeah. Well, I just want to say what's interesting about the multiverse, Into the Multiverse, what you're talking about, the succession. This goes back to what you were originally saying about where these characters come from. I mean, that's very much, I think the Phantom, going back to like the 20s, the Phantom is a character that sticks around, and they eventually made a movie about the Phantom, but he sticks around, for centuries, right? And he different people are trained to become the Phantom. The Phantom has to find a successor. That's a big part of the mythology of the Phantom story.
And it works really well. So let's now leave with the big questions, which is what do these two iconic superheroes say about society? how are Batman and Spider-Man two responses to the same question? And I think the question is, how to be a man, a human man, and also do good and fight evil in this world. What do you think these two approaches? I mean, there's a Batman approach and there's a Spider-Man approach. And to be clear, the Batman approach is what? Vengeance.
Well, the weird thing about Batman is it's impossible to be Batman. I mean, he's devoted his whole life to reforming civilization. I mean, who's going to really do that? And he's forsaken everything we consider to be a normal human life.
Well, that's what you call your utopianistic view, though, right? Like, he's
a fanatic.
He's a fanatic. He's a zealot. He's willing to do harm to himself for the greater good. He's willing to bend the rules for the greater good. He is a man of action. Whereas Peter Parker is a man of thought, a man of reflection, a man of fear, and a man of doubt. Strangely enough, Peter Parker is physically the stronger of the two, but you could almost argue that Batman is the more cunning of the two.
Yes. Spider-Man, he has this humanity. He's. I mean, I can see why people can relate to Spider-Man, love Spider-Man. I mean, you can see why the Into the Multiverse, why it works. You couldn't make a movie like that about Batman. I mean, it just wouldn't be any fun. I mean, because you can have because multiverse, you can have different Spider-Mans that you can relate to.
I think it's because and it goes to my next question, which is Spider-Man is just a role. Who plays the role varies. Now, there's been multiple people who've been Batman, but it never varies when they're Batman. So, what do you think? What do you think these are saying about identity and social identity? What do you think as far as your two approaches? One is the hero as a man, and the other is a man as a hero.
Well, what do you think, Chris? I mean, do
you think that the man as a hero is more compelling? Or do you think it's more compelling the hero as a man? We said that Bruce Wayne is the alter ego of Batman. Is that the more compelling way to go?
Well,
or do you want to be Peter Parker struggling to be his alter ego?
Okay, I'll just say this. I think that Batman on an intellectual level is more interesting because you get to see what it takes to be the best, to create, to reform society. I mean, what would it take for somebody to reform civilization? Well, you got to learn 40 languages, right, and become a computer expert. And you have to learn 134 martial arts.
Yeah.
But with Spider-Man, I mean, he's just a normal person that has to do stuff. He has responsibilities like all of us. So it's much more enjoyable, I guess, from an emotional perspective to read a Spider-Man story.
Well, it's interesting, and I think that we can never really be Batman. We can only dream or aspire or hope we would be Batman, whereas we can feel like Peter Parker, like we're just struggling to get by. How do you feel these two heroes reflect class structure?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting question. I mean, it's interesting in that we never even talked about it this whole time. Spider-Man is solidly middle class. That's always his conception. And Bruce Wayne is one of the richest people in our society, right? And that really reflects in their ideologies, because there are a lot of wealthy people who are utopians and they want to reform society. I mean, they're always doing it. These rich people, they're always talking about it. I mean, you could talk about the Koch brothers. You could talk about the Koch brothers come to mind for me right now. But yeah, Spider-Man's just a normal middle class guy. He never has these crazy utopian ideas. It's just he's hopelessly bourgeois, wouldn't you say?
Well, I just think it's a different thing about being a hero who doesn't have to worry about making his living wage because his financial needs are already met, which is Bruce Wayne, who then fights for those who can't help themselves and uses his wealth as a source for good. And Peter Parker, who is got to figure out how to pay the bills. Strangely enough, he makes money off of the fact that J. Jonah Jameson is obsessed with photos of Spider-Man. So he takes advantage of the fact that Spider-Man is vilified to make his living, which I also find is a very Jewish thing, which I never really got into. And what do these choices say about modern-day masculinity? How to be a man in this world? I mean, as men, should we aspire to be like Bruce Wayne, debonair, suave, commanding, forceful, wealthy, affluent, who are obsessed, dedicated, driven, who can strike fear into the hearts of lesser men? Or should we be thoughtful, loyal, family-oriented, conscientious men who are just witty and trying to survive by what we can to do the best that we can? I mean, it really does seem like that's the dyad. A Superman is the kind of man that we can't be because he is a god. But we can all either be Bruce Wayne or we can be Peter Parker. We can all be Spider-Man or we can all be Batman. But as men, which is the road?
Well, this is an interesting question because, try to imagine Spider-Man as a woman, and Into the Multiverse, there is a female Spider-Man,
there's
right?
Spider-Women and there's Bat-Women and Batgirls and Spider-Girls, yeah. And that's a whole different thing when you put a female in that hero line. But as men, I'm just saying, it's like, I feel that it's very hard to make a hero out of an awkward man, but yet they have with Peter Parker. And it's very hard to make a man seem like he is, I don't know. It's very hard for me to defend Bruce Wayne. Well, I guess my last, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I guess that, in our culture, men have responsibilities, and both Batman and Spider-Man feel a certain responsibility to civilization. Spider-Man, see, it's almost like he's stepping up. You know, when Spider-Man steps up and becomes a superhero, it's almost like he's stepping up and accepting his role as a man in civilization. I mean, that I feel that is a very strong theme of Spider-Man. And when you take, this is why I mentioned when you take Spider-Man, turn him into a woman, it just has a different emotional feeling.
Absolutely.
To me.
Well, great power comes great responsibility. So I would argue that masculine defensiveness, protectiveness, knighthood is embodied in Bruce Wayne. I think women would find him to be a great protector, and maybe he's the kind of guy who also emanates sexuality and eroticism. Peter Parker does not, but Peter Parker has a sense of responsibility and loyalty that would make him an excellent father and husband. So I think to say you really have the man as defender who is wild and represents Eros, and then you have the man who is civilized and kind who represents domestic responsibility. And I really think at the day's end, you can never escape the fact that a Depression era 24-year-old made a wish fulfillment named Bruce Wayne, and an affluent 40-year-old middle-aged man looked back on his life and created an awkward teen named Peter Parker. And at a day's end, I would say, my last question to you is, as an artist to artist, do you think it's better to have a hero who is admirable as a wish fulfillment, or better to have a hero who is possibly relatable but in an awkward way? So someone who shares our strengths or has the gifts we only wish we had?
Well, I think I already talked about this a little bit. So Batman's interesting because he's interesting intellectually because he is like the height of human potential, and he's a utopian, and he's going to reform civilization. But yeah, Batman is more of a fun read. Batman's always more of a fun read. I mean,
I don't think
look at Into the Multiverse.
I think Spider-Man
Into the Multiverse is super fun.
Wait, you just said Batman is more of a fun read.
No, Spider-Man's more of a fun read.
Okay, I was just correcting you.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant. Spider-Man's more of a fun read. That's why Into the Multiverse is so much fun. I mean, you couldn't make Into the Multiverse with Batman. It'd just be a bunch of, like, dour, a sourpuss, like, serious Batman that, like, you don't want to be in the same room with, ever.
That said, I will say that Batman, currently, I would rather read than Spider-Man. Spider-Man may be one of my favorite superheroes, but as a comic, I find there's greater consistency in reading a Batman comic. That's all I got to say. You got anything more to add?
Man, we covered everything.
All right. Well, Randall, X-Men are awesome. I didn't want to talk about the animated X-Men because they deserve their own episode.
Uh-oh.
X-Men deserve their own episode. So, Randall, damn you for letting the cat out of the bag. That will be a future episode. But until then, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.